Hello, welcome back. We talk about craft-related drama on this channel, so if that sounds like something that's interesting to you, then subscribe so you don't miss any of my videos. Watch all my other videos if you want to learn about craft drama. I've been talking a lot about knitting and fiber arts related drama recently, but I have some non-fiber arts related videos lined up, so if you want to learn about the world of crafting, niche crafting drama, then hang out here. It's been fun. Thank you guys for 50K. That's actually insane. Today, we're going to be talking about something that has gripped the fiber arts world for the past couple weeks, the disastrous yarn festival Wool and Folk. So before we get too far, let's just go over what is Wool and Folk and what is a yarn festival. What does that even entail? New York Sheep and Wool, aka Rhinebeck, is a big yarn festival that happens every year in Rhinebeck, New York. The event has about 300 yarn vendors and an estimated 20,000 visitors. This festival has been going on since 1980, and this year it was scheduled for October 21st and 22nd. If you watched my Ravelry Part 1 video, which I will link above if you haven't seen yet, you might remember a similar event, Maryland Sheep and Wool, which started in 1974. New York Sheep and Wool, or Rhinebeck, is a very similar thing. It includes a lot of different kinds of vendors, auctions, livestock displays, a variety of demonstrations, including dog herding, sheep shearing, book signings, competitions, including the sheep to shawl competition, and a llama parade. Because this event is so huge, a few smaller festivals sort of spun off as Rhinebeck kickoff events. The three this year were Indie Untangled, Cake Palooza, and Wool and Folk. So this year, Wool and Folk was planned for Friday, October 20th with a Thursday night warm-up event, which was a warm-up to the warm-up of Rhinebeck. The Friday event was scheduled to have yarn vendors, live music, and something called the Podcaster Patio, basically where big-name knitting podcasters and YouTubers came and sat for Q&As and meet and greets, that type of thing. So, long story short, and then later long story long, the biggest complaints were overcrowding, parking being too far away with a shuttle that was hard to find, complete lack of organization, inaccessible venue, long lines for everything, no event map, exorbitant pricing of the event, the mysterious fifth floor, no event map or signage, and of course none of this was made better by the fact that there was just torrential downpour the entire time. One vendor said that everything was unorganized from the moment they arrived, but that the most poignant aspect was the sheer lack of accommodations and accessibility for those who needed it, shoppers and vendors alike. On the Wool and Folk website, under the ticketing information, there was an FAQs section that had a question that asked if the event was accessible, and all it said was just yes. Wool and Folk 2023, this year, went so poorly and had so many obvious problems from really early on that people on Reddit, Instagram, and Ravelry are referring to it as Fiberfest, spelled F-Y-B-E-R. This name derives from the infamous Firefest of 2017. Very quick tangent, I first learned about Firefest through two different documentaries that both came out in 2019 that I watched back-to-back one morning while I was working on a project. Very, very quick summary of the Firefest. This 25-year-old Billy McFarland marketed and sold tickets to what appeared to be a luxury music festival on a private island in the Bahamas. In short, he egregiously overpromised and was unable to deliver on any of these promises. He was then fined and is now serving time in prison for fraud. In the years following the festival, the name Firefest has become ubiquitous with events that just are an absolute disaster and tend to overpromise and underdeliver. Now, this isn't a video on Firefest, but if you haven't seen the documentaries, I really do highly recommend them. There's one on Hulu and one on Netflix, and I would recommend watching both. I think they both give really interesting sides of the story. Speaking of Netflix, I hate when I want to watch something or I'm in the middle of watching a show and then just one day I log on and it's not available in the US. But now I don't have to worry about that anymore because I use the sponsor of today's video, Surfshark. Surfshark is a VPN or virtual private network that keeps your online activity safe by encrypting your personal information and allowing you to change your virtual location. Every now and then I want to watch an episode of The Office on Netflix, but it's not available in the US anymore. But I can toggle my location to the UK using Surfshark and then watch any episode of The Office and a bunch of other shows that aren't available in the US. I can also change my location to Canada and watch my friend Gucci Pineapple in this Canadian show, I Hate People, People Hate Me. Surfshark also keeps me safe on public Wi-Fi networks, like when I work in coffee shops or in the library or on the train. The VPN encrypts, aka masks, my data so that anyone who might be trying to spy on me can't see my activity. Because obviously I don't want people to find my personal information, but I also don't want anybody knowing how many times I Googled Shrek Croc outfit ideas. And because I'm nosy, Surfshark Alert keeps me in the loop on potential breaches and monitors my personal data so that I can check that nothing is being shared that shouldn't be. Surfshark is offering viewers of my channel an exclusive Black Friday deal. Enter promo code INTHEMOMENT to get 6 additional months for free at surfshark.deals/INTHEMOMENT. Thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring this video, and let's get back into the disaster. This Woolen Folk event featured yarn vendors and live music, and this year was set to be its 3rd iteration. The first 2 years were co-planned by Felicia Eve and Catherine Clark, owners of Brooklyn-based yarn stores String Thing Studio and Brooklyn General Store, respectively. According to most accounts, Felicia was more interested in the yarn aspect of the festival, the wool, and Catherine was more interested in the live music aspect of the festival, or the folk. Felicia planned the festival this year pretty much entirely alone. There actually was another organizer named Pam who is mentioned in some of the vendor stories. I couldn't find her last name or really any information about her anywhere online, so I am not sure. I didn't do a deep dive on her, but there was someone else. It wasn't just Felicia by herself. There are, of course, a variety of reasons why a duo may split up, not the least of which is that planning a live event at this scale is a huge time commitment. So this on its own might not have meant anything, but knowing what we know now, this is the first of many red flags that we will see. Who is Felicia Eve, the event organizer of Woolen Folk? Like I said, Felicia is the owner of String Thing Studio in Brooklyn, New York. Not entirely relevant, but interesting is that she was a licensed podiatrist for 12 years, and she split her time between Buffalo, New York, and Washington, D.C. while she was doing podiatry. When she, her husband, and her 3 kids moved to Brooklyn, New York, she ended up kind of stopping with the podiatry and being a stay-at-home mom. Apparently, she was really involved in the PTA. She did a lot of volunteer fundraising and things like that. In an interview with Black-Owned Brooklyn, she says that she was inspired to open the yarn store after her mother passed away at 64. Her mother apparently had always been really big on always follow your passions, do what you love, and if you can make a little money from it, then you should do that. So she says that her mother's death inspired her to start this yarn store. She said that this loss got her thinking about her passions in life, which is cool and probably true. I'm not saying it's not true, but she also did receive a $250,000 inheritance, which served as the startup funds for her business. And if you want to know how I know about the inheritance, it's because she was in a QuickBooks ad where she gives the details about her inheritance money and says that the thing she was bad at with running her business was balancing her books, and that's why she needed QuickBooks. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Felicia Eve, maybe not good with money. That piece of information on its own doesn't necessarily mean anything, but you'll see how it's interesting the further we go on. That's enough about Felicia for now. I will get much more into it later on, I promise. But before we go into any of what happened at Fiberfest, let's go over a little bit of the background timeline leading up to the event on October 20th. On March 17th, 2023, Felicia announced that Woolen Folk 2023 would take place at Stone Ridge Orchard in New York on October 20th. And this announcement was made on Instagram. In tandem with this initial announcement, there was also an announcement that vendor applications are open, right when they announced the venue. And by the end of April, some vendors were already announcing on their Instagrams that they would be vending at the festival. At this point, the vendors who were announcing that they were going to be there on Instagram had signed a contract, which I found a copy of in a Reddit comment. So I wasn't a vendor, but the details that I read in this contract on Reddit line up with the vendor stories that have been coming out in the past few weeks. So I have no reason to believe that someone would type up an entire fake contract. It was pretty lengthy, but just so you know where I got my sources, take it with a grain of salt. But let's say the contract is real, which I think it is. It states that the vendors must submit their payment by May 15th in order to secure their spot. And there was a slight variety in vendor booth pricing, but the basic price was $900 for a 10 by 10 foot booth. A shared booth was half the cost at $450, and there was a discount for returning vendors. They had to only pay $800 for a full booth. The website also lists a special 50% off deal for any BIPOC Woolen Folk vendors. Another thing to note is that vendor staff had to pay for entry to the event as well, and we'll get into ticket pricing a little bit later on. I don't know if this is standard, if the staff has to pay for entry to an event, because I would assume that they are working during the event. They're not like going around hanging out. I just thought that was interesting. Don't know if that's normal. Vendor staff tickets were $25 for the main event and $160 to the Thursday night warm-up event, which was apparently mandatory for vendors. So again, more on tickets later, but just putting that out there. And I also want to say $900 is a pretty high booth fee from what I can see. The New York Sheep and Wool fee starts at $400 and then is on a sliding scale as it gets closer to the event. At its peak, it's only $550, and this is for an event that has an estimated attendance of 20,000 people. Woolen Folk's attendance is much smaller. And speaking of money, events like this are expensive to run. There are rental fees, venue fees, music fees for the live music, insurance, permits, etc. In addition to the ticket sales and the vendor sales, there were also a number of sponsors. Sponsorship money also went through the Woolen Folk website, so I can actually see how much the sponsors paid. There were different levels of sponsorship, the highest being $7,500 and the lowest at $1,000. There were 9 sponsors for this event, and we will talk about this more and break this down more later, so just hold on to that as well. So back to the contract a little bit. It says that the booth fee will include the booth, 1 long table, and 2 chairs. Any additional tables and chairs have a rental fee of $16 per table and $3.50 per chair. The booth will also include electricity and Wi-Fi access. It says all other display furniture and any special product lighting are the responsibility of the vendor. The contract also includes the schedule, indicating that the vendors will be vending on Thursday night from 5 to 9 p.m. and on Friday from 12 to 7 p.m. It says that there will be a load-in day on Wednesday, load-out will be on Friday night and Saturday morning. The contract also states that all vendors would be provided food and water during the event. Something you would think I wouldn't have to point out, but this will also come back later. So, the vendors had applied, the contracts were signed, and Woolen Folk started selling tickets to attendees on July 1st, 2023. The early bird tickets were on sale for a week at $40, and then on July 8th, the price went up to $50. As I've sort of alluded to, there was also this special Thursday night warm-up event, which included exclusive shopping and a catered dinner. Tickets for this warm-up event were $250, which doesn't seem worth it to me. That's crazy. But that's also knowing what I know now and just knowing how I like to spend my money, which is not for exclusive events like that. I don't blame anyone for paying that amount. I've seen some people feel like ashamed that they sort of fell for paying that much money for what they got, but it's not on them, it's on the organizers who made it seem like this would be worth it. On July 7th, they also announced another option that people could buy tickets for, a shuttle bus from String Thing Studio in Brooklyn and then a pickup in Midtown that went to the event. This pretty much is what it sounded like, just a big bus that would carpool to a bunch of different Rhinebeck events for the weekend. So it wasn't just to Woolen Folk, it was also going to go to Cakepalooza and then Rhinebeck. The bus was scheduled to take attendees to yarn shops in the Hudson Valley area, Woolen Folk, Cakepalooza, and Rhinebeck. This would include transportation to and from the hotel as well on the day of these events. The cost of the bus was listed at $470, including the warm-up experience, or $245 not including the warm-up experience. The website states, should you choose not to go to the Woolen Folk warm-up, you will stay at the hotel that evening. The listing for the bus also includes information for what hotel the group will be staying at, which was the Holiday Inn Poughkeepsie? Poughkeepsie. Okay, not how I thought. Which was the Holiday Inn Poughkeepsie at $179 per night. So, tickets have gone on sale in July, which must mean that the contract with the venue has been solidified, right? Right? Well, according to the Town of Marbletown meeting minutes from the town board meeting on August 28th, this was not the case. I just want to say, whoever took notes for this meeting deserves like a little prize, a little gold star or something, because I really enjoyed reading these. I liked how detailed they were and how they really encapsulated the conflict that was going on here. Context for what I'm about to share. Stone Ridge Orchard, which is the venue, is applying for a special use permit for the Woolen Folk event at this town board meeting. The applicant listed in the minutes is not Felicia, the organizer, but is someone named Elizabeth Ryan, who is the owner of the orchard. So, what do these meeting minutes tell us? The first line is, The event was brought to the orchard in the spring, but a contract has not been signed. No contract. The document also tells us that the organizers of the event originally told the orchard that there would be 3,000 attendees, and the orchard said, no, that's too many, and then compromised and said, okay, we can probably handle 2,000. At this point in the notes, you can start to see the tension building. The applicant, Elizabeth Ryan, says that they feel it's a pretty low impact event overall, and that the organizers of the event, aka Felicia, would be entirely responsible for the staff and the infrastructure of the event. And then there's a funny little back and forth, which I will include on the screen word for word, but present as a dramatization of what I imagine happened. Hi, hello, happy to be here. So I know 2,000 people is kind of a lot, and I know you're a little worried about it, but no worries. It'll be a low impact event overall, and we can handle it. The orchard can handle it. I'm a professional. No worries, it'll be okay. Miss Ryan, 2,000 people in one day is a lot. This will highly impact traffic in the surrounding area, as well as have an impact on the orchard itself. Have you spoken with the organizers of the event to ensure that they are applying for the proper mass gathering permits in addition to the special use permit you're applying for today? So we did tell them about this, and even though we don't have a contract or an agreement signed, we did tell them that they do need to get the proper permits. And we also did tell them that this kind of permit usually is a 6-month application process. So this should be totally fine for an event that's 2 months away, right? Oh yeah, for sure. I can't see that being a problem. With all due respect, ma'am, if the orchard is not running the event, then why are the organizers of the event itself not the ones here speaking with us today? I second this. We can process the application with you, Elizabeth Ryan, the owner of the orchard, or with Felicia Stenhouse-Eve, the organizer of the event. But regardless, it is your responsibility as the owner of the property to ensure that all of the proper permits are acquired and all of the compliance rules are followed. Miss Ryan, this event is only 2 months away, and we have yet to discuss many crucial details such as a proposal, a site plan, a contract between an organizer and the orchard, and a traffic study. This information needs to be provided expeditiously. Now listen. I really think the orchard can handle 2,000 people, and we can handle the traffic and the attendance and all of it. You don't even have to worry about it. It'll be just fine. Miss Ryan, let's just refer this application to the Ulster County Planning Board. All in favor say aye. 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 Wonderful. I can't imagine this going badly at all. Let's move on to Bob's application for the Oakley Road Minor Subdivision Project. All right. Thanks for indulging me on that. Enough reading through local town board meeting minutes for the time being. Let's move on to September 17th, when Felicia went live on the Woollen Folk Instagram and announced that the festival would move to the Foreland, a different venue, in the Catskills, about a 30-minute drive north from Stone Ridge Orchard. In the live, she attributes the move of venues to inclement weather that weekend, stating that the Foreland offers much more indoor room to vend so people can stay dry. And just so we can orient ourselves to where we are, the Dutchess County Fairgrounds, which is where Rhinebeck is located and where all of these satellite events are located around, is about halfway between the Stone Ridge Orchard and the Foreland. In the live, Felicia says that the venue change shouldn't change people's accommodations or plans because it's really close to where the other events are going on anyway. And closeness is relative, but the Foreland is much further out of the way, and depending on where people were staying in relation to the other festivals, especially to Rhinebeck, this might have not just been a quick and easy change. I know at least some people online have said that they had to change their accommodations and lose deposits after the venue change. And one of the worst things about this venue change was the fact that it was originally just said in a live. A lot of vendors, attendees, and sponsors missed it completely. There was no email sent out announcing the change. It was just a live and then an Instagram post. So now that we went through all of that about the original venue, let me tell you a little bit about the new venue, the Foreland, which is where the event ended up happening. So the Foreland is this beautiful venue that is usually used for private events and weddings. According to their booking information, the buildings have a capacity for 500 guests, which breaks down to 200 guests indoors and 500 if they are using the indoor and outdoor spaces. And this is 500 wedding guests. I used to work as an assistant to a wedding planner, and we would do these big weddings in Orange County, Our biggest wedding that we did was, I think, 250 guests or so, and that felt like a huge amount of guests to have at a wedding. If the Forlands capacity is 500 guests, that means it's big. Their website says that the venue has 15,000 square feet of indoor and outdoor space. And looking at these layout mock-ups for wedding guests, we can get a bit of a sense of scale. With a wedding versus a vending event, there's obviously a different furniture setup, right? Like for a yarn festival, you don't need 3,000 chairs and seating at tables for 3,000 people. But you also don't just have like empty space then, you know? If you have 90 vendors in 10 by 10 booths, that's already 9,000 square feet taken up by booths. And yeah, people can walk into the booths and they can walk around them. It's not like the booth is dead space on the ground. But like, where do the food options go? Where are the bathrooms? Where's the seating? Where are places for people to just hang out? And like, yeah, the booths aren't dead space, but they're probably taken up with tables and chairs and displays and yarn. The more and more we break this down, this is the point where more red flags start to appear. On September 18th, back to the Marbletown meeting minutes, Elizabeth Ryan withdrew the application. It's unclear who dissolved the contract, if this was Stonebridge dissolving the contract with Wool & Folk or the other way around. We don't know. Would love to find out, but I couldn't find anything about that for now. And on September 27th, there was another board meeting, this time in the village of Catskills, and this time Felicia has made an appearance. The notes here are much more sparse, but they do tell us some crucial bits of information. At this point, Wool & Folk had sold 2,500 tickets, and Felicia presents the parking plan, which is a shuttle from a parking lot, and that she has looked into parking at Walmart and Lowe's. There's no mention of whether Wool & Folk has applied for and been approved for the mass gathering permit required by the Catskills. Not accusing them of anything here, I'm just saying there's no mention of it in the minutes. The village of Catskills defines a mass gathering as any event expecting to draw 1,000 to 4,999 people at one time. The permit should be posted in a visible place, and a proposal for mass gathering was meant to include detailed parking map of the gathering, detailed plan for ticketing and how to make sure that non-ticket holders would not enter the gathering, detailed plan for signage, a statement from the fire department approving adequate fire safety, detailed plan for emergency situations, security plans, plan for food, water, bathrooms, etc. Based on what we will learn about what happened at this event, it kind of seems like maybe they didn't get this permit, or that someone at the mass gathering permit office just let a lot of things slide. Like maybe it was a Friday, they just wanted to like let the application go through. But it seems that the event organizers did not have a lot of this information that they maybe should have had. On October 16th, we get another update on Instagram 4 days before the festival, outlining the parking options for the event. So the plan for parking was announced on this lovely little slideshow that was not emailed to people, I believe, and it has 4 parts. The first part is street parking. Yay! The next option is 100 parking spots at Elliott Park, which is a 2-minute drive or a 14-minute walk to the Forland venue. There is mention of a shuttle bus running from this parking location to the venue until the parking situation is full. The next spot is called Dutchman's Landing. This has 350 parking spots. This is a 3-minute drive or an 18-minute walk. And then the last option is the Walmart parking lot, which apparently has 1,000 parking spaces and is a 28-minute walk away from the venue. If you're keeping track, this is still only about 1,500 spaces, and we can assume that maybe some of these attendees are carpooling, some of them are taking the Amtrak, but kind of seems like maybe we don't have enough parking here. At this point, people started noticing that maybe something was up here. There was a post on the Craftsnark Reddit that was like, hey, have you guys seen the parking? Looks kind of crazy. It looks like maybe not enough. So now let's break down what actually happened. I want to look at the event from 3 different perspectives: the vendors, the sponsors, and the attendees. These stories were taken from public Instagram, Facebook, Reddit, and Ravelry posts, as well as a few that were privately sent to me. In some cases, I will indicate whose story a piece of information came from, and in some cases, people have asked to remain anonymous, so I will not be disclosing that. Very quick review of how the event was set up in case you forgot, because it's been like 20 minutes since we talked about it. But on Thursday night, there was this early bird shopping event, which was intended to feel exclusive and VIP, and a limited number of tickets were sold. This was marketed as a chance to shop stock early, meet and greet with vendors, enjoy a sit-down catered dinner from Fig and Pig, and a live musical performance. And then the next day, the festival was scheduled from 12 to 7 p.m. as the Wool and Folk event, which was meant to be, according to the website, a celebration of our diverse, inclusive, and extraordinary fiber community mixed with music, food, and incredible experiences. AKA yarn shopping, food, and live music. Right from the get-go, on Wednesday, vendors started running into problems when they showed up to set up for the event. When they showed up, vendors said that there was nowhere to check in and no clear person who was in charge. The vendors had been told in writing that they would be vending inside, and when they arrived, they found out that they would actually have to vend outside and be prepared for the weather. There were also no assigned booths. And in a post on their Instagram, Terrapin Fiberworks said that the only map at the event that they saw was a hand-drawn layout in a college-ruled notebook. Other vendors like Explorer Knits, who had shipped their stock on pallets and instructed for it not to be unpacked until they arrived, had to search themselves in multiple buildings and found their stock in 2 different locations. Some vendors were told that they would have tent flaps with security so that they could leave their stock overnight and it would be safe from theft and weather, but there were no tent flaps. Some vendors went to a local Lowe's and bought supplies to secure the tents themselves. One anonymous vendor who submitted their story said that the event did not have a booth space for them when they showed up and proceeded to walk them around trying to sell them on multiple outdoor spaces and also tried to have them take a spot on the 5th floor, which was completely separate from the rest of the event. Vendors who had arrived on time to set up their product had to wait up to 2.5 hours to get into a booth and start putting up their stock. Others said they had to change locations multiple times while setting up, with one vendor saying that they had to change 5 times during setup. Also, remember in the contract that the vendors were told that they would have electricity and parking? It appears that they did have electricity access via very exposed cables that were running through the ground and the mud that multiple people reported tripping over. And when vendors showed up, many of them did not have access to parking. 316 Dye Studio said that all of their stuff was in an SUV, so they were able to pull up pretty close to the event and unload somewhat easily, but another vendor that they had talked to had to park 1/4 mile away in a church parking lot up a hill and had to take 6 trips back and forth to bring all of their stock down to the festival. Like I said, it was raining, so vendors were having to prepare for rain when they had not been told they would need to prepare for rain, and the vendors who were lucky enough to vend inside were crammed inside like sardines. The booths were packed next to each other with barely enough space for people to walk around, and at least one vendor, Circle of Stitches, a Salem-based yarn store, was on a stairwell, and others were on the 5th floor of the building, which was really hard to get to and completely outside of the realm of everything else that was going on. Overall, the vendor stories have a really similar sentiment. There was a lack of communication from the organizers before, during, and after the event that made it really difficult for them to adequately prepare. In addition, some vendors reported having really negative experiences unloading and unpacking after the event as well. One person said that after the event, their booths were screamed at over and over at 9:55 p.m. to get out by the building manager, since apparently they were not supposed to be there past 10, even though their contract that they signed said that they could be there until 11 and then all day the next day. And something that I haven't pointed out yet, if it wasn't already clear, but the contract that they signed, they had never been sent an updated one with the new venue. So the contract had all of the Stone Ridge Orchard information in it. The building manager yelled at these vendors, telling them that they had to leave immediately, even though they were not finished loading their inventory and printing receipts. The manager apparently called for one of the organizers, Pam, and Pam got there. Instead of doing anything to help the vendors, she just sided with the building manager. And this person says their favorite quote from Pam is her saying, "Things change and contracts change, and your tears won't do shit." Probably unsurprisingly, the sponsors of the event and the special guests did not receive any proper communication either. 2 sponsors, Tony from TL Yarn Crafts and Adela of Lola Bean Yarn Co., were also a part of this elusive podcast patio. Both of them revealed in videos that they agreed to be a part of this podcasting thing without any payment, so they were just volunteering their time to come and do what was presented to them as a Q&A event. In a video on her YouTube channel, Tony said that she tried to reach out to Felicia a few weeks before the event to see what questions she should be prepared for, and just received no reply. She said she even emailed her the day before the event to see if she could get some more information on what she should know, and also just received no response. Tony says she ended up having to prepare the questions herself for this event, for them to ask to her, which is just like so strange to me. Tony also says that the tent that they were set up in was so dark and damp and loud that none of the audience members could hear. So by the time it got to the Q&A portion, like the audience questions portion of this podcast patio event, nobody had any questions because nobody could hear what anybody was saying. The other podcasters / sponsors were Adela and Jimmy of Lola Bean Yarn Co. In a live after the event, Adela said that they had agreed to be sponsors because of their friendship with Felicia. They said that they didn't have a lot of money, but they wanted to support the event, so they put the $2,500 sponsor payment onto their credit card. They did not attend as vendors, and they weren't paid to do the podcast patio, so they actually ended up losing a lot of money by going to this event. They also said that before the event, there was one Zoom meeting where the podcasters were told the times and some event details. And in this first meeting, they were also told, oh, we'll have a second meeting where we'll go over more details, over like what the actual podcast patio would be and what they would be talking about. There was no second meeting. Adela also says that she and Jimmy found out about the venue change to the Foreland from an Instagram post talking about parking. I somehow deleted a bunch of footage off of my camera while trying to make space on it. So I'm re-recording a few spots in this room. Don't be alarmed when it like cuts to this. It's still me. Please don't say anything about it. Please don't comment. I'm so embarrassed. I'm so embarrassed that I deleted all of that. And yeah, enjoy. So finally, let's talk about what actually happened. On Thursday night, one user says that they showed up at 4 p.m. because they were told the event was from 4 to 9. A lot of other places I'm seeing 5 to 9. There are a few details in this story that as I read into things and as I read different accounts, I'm seeing different numbers for things. So like some people are saying the event was from 4 to 9, others say 5 to 9. Some people were saying the ticket prices for the Friday event were, on a sliding scale from 35 to 60. Others say 45 to 60, 45 to 50. There's just lots of numbers going on, and I think that really just speaks to the lack of organization overall. But anyway, this person shows up at 4 p.m. There was nowhere to check in. The vendors were still setting up. They were still kind of frantically trying to find parking and setting up all of their stuff. The biggest complaint from vendors on this Thursday night event was that there was just really low traffic overall. There were 91 vendors, and this Thursday night event sold around 200 tickets. And the vendors were required to be there. They also had to pay $160 for each staff member that they had on their team, and some vendors had multiple employees there. Some vendors reported making 0 sales during this Thursday night event. So that means they're out all of this money, they're out all of this time setting up their booth, and then they had to tear it down again just to set it back up in the morning on Friday. The warm-up event was also disorganized in a lot of other ways. The tables were really close together, and it was really hard for people to get in and sit down at the tables. The way that the event was set up as well, the dinner tables were completely surrounded by sound equipment and vendor booths. So people were literally crammed into these tables as they ate their dinner. One attendee at the event said that their husband kept saying, "How many people are supposed to be here tomorrow? I don't think there's going to be enough room for this many people." At the end of this Thursday night, he said, "I don't think we should come back tomorrow. It's going to be absolute madness." And they ended up in the morning on Friday driving past, seeing the line, and then just completely leaving. This event was also advertised as having live music and a gourmet dinner. The dinner was a buffet that began around 6 p.m., at which time Felicia announced that shopping was closed for the night, something that was not communicated to the vendors or the attendees. So many people were planning on making their purchases after they had eaten. They had spent the time before looking around. They were going to buy after, and then vendors were just told that shopping was done. There was no music at the event until 6:30, a little bit after the buffet dinner had began. Apparently, during dinner, Felicia also announced that half of the musicians just hadn't shown up, so only 3 out of 6 of the musicians scheduled to play were there. Not sure what happened with that. It was a little bit difficult to find out any sort of information about the music, but a lot of reports just said that there wasn't very much music and that these were house cover bands and not folk music. Most of the attendees said that the food was good, but it was not worth it for the price that they paid. Here's a picture of someone's plate. There were also supposed to be swag bags that people could take home. According to this one user on Reddit, Felicia grabbed one of these bags and said, "1, grab one on your way out. Don't grab it before." They ran out of bags, and a few people came up to her and asked how they could get the bags to the event that they paid $250 for, and she allegedly said, "You saw me put them there, it's not my fault you didn't grab one." According to a Ravelry user, the grab bag contained business cards, some of which contained coupon codes to be used at the booths the next day, a Ravelry water bottle and a bag, a measuring tape, earrings, a button, stickers, and 2 tote bags. They also ran out of desserts in addition to running out of the grab bags, and it seems like they just had not ordered enough. Though this event was not as crowded, it was still dangerous with things being shoved very close together, the booths, the spikes, the tents, everything, lots of tripping hazards. There were cables running everywhere, there were stakes and ropes and all of that stuff. Apparently one woman fell over a spike, and according to a post on Ravelry, she ended up with a broken bone in her shoulder from the fall. Another person on Reddit mentions that an older woman fell within 5 feet of Felicia and she did nothing to help her out. Not sure if this was the same woman. I would expect it would be out of this crowd, but these were sourced from 2 different places. Many of the attendee stories from the Thursday night event report that Felicia was not speaking to any of the vendors or attendees except for her small circle of friends and the famous vendors/podcasters. And then here are some comments that she allegedly made during this event in response to some valid complaints and criticisms. When people complained about parking being far away, she said, "It's not hard to walk. No one can do anything for themselves. Everyone just has to complain about something or expects special treatment for stupid reasons. Good for you for not being like that. I made a good choice paying you." That's what she said to the musicians, apparently. "Everybody is too sensitive and needy. It's not my fault you have to walk your stuff here. I didn't make you vend." And something to point out, these vendors at these events, many of them make their living from traveling to festivals like these and selling their yarn there. These are all small businesses. Some of them are on the higher end of small businesses, but they're all independently owned. Many of them are 1 to 2 or 3 person teams, very small. Moving on to Friday, a little bit of a layout of the land, the event space. There were 2 buildings and then a larger tent outside. The tent was meant to be where the live music and podcasters were, but many report saying that they did not hear any music the whole day. And then the podcast tent was really difficult for people to get to, even if they wanted to go and listen. There was also a building on the right that had double doors for entry and a smaller building with vendors inside as well. On the double doors on this old studio building, there was just a small paper sign that told attendees about the vendors on the 5th floor. So the vending locations that we have are outside in tents, inside in 2 separate buildings, and inside on this mysterious 5th floor location. Because this is confusing, you would expect that there would be some sort of map telling you where you can find the vendors, what vendors are in what locations, but there was no map. There was no way to, say, find the vendor that you had been specifically coming to shop from. You just kind of had to wander around, and because the event was so crowded, that was not easy to do. Unsurprisingly, the parking situation did not work out too well. Many attendees posted saying that the shuttle system was a complete mess. The shuttles either were too hard to find, they didn't pick them up, and when the shuttles actually arrived at the venue, cops would not let them drop people off at the entrance of the venue, instead making them loop around and drop attendees off at the bottom of a hill, so then all of these attendees had to walk up the hill just to get to the entrance. One user on TikTok, Dammit Alexis, says that there were no shuttles from the Amtrak, even though those had been promised them. Her and one other attendee got off the Amtrak and were looking around for a shuttle. There was not one, so they ended up having to Uber to the venue. One attendee, Nitty Witch, made a 45-minute video talking about the event, and in her video she mentions that she attended the event with a disabled friend. She says that as soon as the parking plan was announced, she knew that this would not be an accessible option for her friend, and that they would have to ask for handicap accessible parking. She said she was on her computer when she received an email about parking and responded immediately saying, "Hi, yes, I would love to have one of the handicap spots." She was told that the event had already run out of parking and that they would just have to make do without. On their public Instagram, Woolen Folk also responded to comments with similar sentiment, saying that, "Oh, sorry, the handicap spots are out. You'll just have to figure it out." On the Skane Scoop podcast, they said that there were only 10 handicap parking spots available. And remember, this is for 3,000 attendees. There was no way this was ever going to work. As attendees began showing up, there was a huge long line that formed, entering through one entrance. Christine Parker Co. documented this standing in line with updates on her Instagram story. She said that there was only one entrance with one staff person checking in all of the tickets, which made things go really slowly. They were also making some people wait in line, even though they already had wristbands, which apparently already granted them entry to the event. Christine later posted an update on her story saying that there actually had been 4 total check-in locations, but because there were no signs pointing to these other spots, nobody could find them and people ended up waiting in this long line in the rain for way longer. As I've already talked about, the event was just way over capacity and extremely overcrowded. The inside of the event was described as jam-packed, overwhelming, and dangerous. Similar sentiment was expressed by nearly every post I saw or video that I watched about this. There were just too many people for the space. Too many people to walk around, too many people to shop, too many people to eat or sit down or go to the bathroom. One vendor reports seeing a little boy hiding in a booth just so he could take a break from the crowds because the building was too packed for him to even be able to leave. Others expressed being so overwhelmed and uncomfortable that they left the event early even though they had paid so much money to travel there, to stay there, and to enter the event. Because of this highly stressful environment, people were not able to shop the way that they had planned on. Many people had given themselves budgets for this and had planned on spending money to support these small businesses, but ended up just not being able to, which severely impacted the sales of especially the smaller businesses. This event was also marketed as a food festival with food trucks. There ended up only being 3 food trucks for 3,000 people, and the options were vegan, barbecue, and oysters. I didn't see too many complaints about the actual quality of the food. I'm sure the food trucks were great. Several people said that the food was somewhat of a highlight because they were just so exhausted and hungry and the food tasted good. So good on the food trucks, all of that. Vendors were also supposed to receive food vouchers for the food trucks and were promised food and water in the contract. Many vendors said that they either did not receive any food vouchers at all or that they didn't receive enough to provide food for themselves and their entire staff. So again, it's just thing after thing of vendors having to cover the costs that the Woolen Folk Festival was either too cheap or too disorganized to provide for them. Many of these vendors traveled significant distances to come to this event. One vendor came all the way from the UK, and many report not even breaking even. There was also significant flooding at this event. While the rain is not the fault of the organizers, of course, it did cause flooding in the booths and in the walkways. According to most reports from the vendors, they did not receive any sort of help from the organizers to mitigate the flooding in terms of sandbags, tarps, anything like that. Some vendors' booths flooded. In response to this flooding, other vendors offered to move around their displays and share booths. So many booths contained 2 vendors who had each paid for $900 to secure a 10x10 booth and now were sharing one. In addition, many of them had some ruined stock that fell on the ground in the mud. You don't want yarn, you don't want project bags, you don't want any of this stuff to get wet, and especially you don't want it to be muddy. Instead of any sort of actual plan for rain-safe walkways on the gravel and the mud and the hills, they just used cardboard boxes to put on the mud as a walkway. One thing about cardboard is that it's not waterproof. Like, when it gets wet, it just is slick. And the worst part about the box thing is that they used vendors' boxes. One vendor said that they asked the organizer where they should store their boxes that they had used to ship the yarn to the event. The organizers told them a spot to put them. They had folded and stacked up all their boxes. They came back in the morning, the boxes were gone, and they were just all over the muddy floor. They were relying on these boxes to ship their product home. And again, the negligence of the event organizers is costing the vendors money. Another concern was the bathrooms. There was a booth set up blocking the bathrooms, which is bad for bathroom access and also bad for the booth because then your booth is right by the bathrooms, which is just unpleasant. Bathrooms were hard to find, there was not adequate signage for people to find them, and there was just not enough for the number of attendees. Seems like a common theme we're seeing. One attendee said that while waiting in line for the bathroom, they watched a woman vomit in a corner because she was unable to get into a stall in time. Someone else says that there was a breastfeeding mother who was looking for a place to pump and ended up having to sit in the mud because there was just nowhere to sit and no access to the bathrooms. And yeah, let's finally talk about this 5th floor space. This was a space that was completely cut off from the rest of the event. The organizers had not reserved any of floors 2 through 4. And these vendors were just shoved up there last minute. Remember that the booths were not assigned, nobody knew where they were going to be vending. The only way up to the 5th floor was up a small stairwell that apparently was not even 2 people wide, or in an old tiny elevator. On the 5th floor and throughout the rest of the venue, there was just a huge bottlenecking problem from the overcrowding. If there was any kind of emergency, if there was a fire, if someone had even yelled, "Shooter," there could have been a ton of injuries if people had panicked. It's really unacceptable to put event guests in such a precarious position. In addition to the visibly hazardous conditions, the event was, put simply, just not accessible to many different groups of people. Most people are pointing out the glaring inaccessibilities to attendees who had mobility aids like wheelchairs or canes. The walkways were too narrow, they had gravel on them, and there was no way for people to move around. In addition, the event did not do anything to cater to anyone who would not be able to attend something without any COVID safety protocols, sensory need accommodations, any seating options, or access to certain facilities like gender-neutral bathrooms or nursing rooms. This is important because accessibility is important for all events, but especially in the knitting and crafting community. There are so many disabled, neurodivergent, and chronically ill people who are drawn to crafting because of the nature of the hobby. This article, written by Gray Lundy, outlines what accommodations should have been in place before an event can be defined as accessible, which this event was marketed as. They say that it is vital that accessibility considerations are listed on the event website before, so that people can read before they purchase tickets. Overall, the event was just a disaster, so let's talk a little bit about the backlash. After the event, the initial response on social media started out pretty slowly. A lot of vendors felt that they could not speak out publicly for fear of repercussions or being banned from vending at this event or events in the future. Some of the attendees were not as concerned about this and were posting more on their stories. But regardless, many people said that attending or vending at the event just didn't feel worth it. Complaints erupted primarily on Instagram and Reddit, and this was the point where people began referring to the event as Fiberfest. This was when people started posting their stories that I have compiled here for you today, and most were calling for some sort of apology or explanation from Felicia and the organizers of the event. Because Felicia did not respond directly at first, in addition to people being upset about Felicia's lack of response immediately, people also started criticizing the vendors who posted about having a good time at the event. So despite all of these things that I've outlined as being problems, some vendors had a pretty good show. They made a decent amount of sales, they met people, they had fun, and people pointed out that it was a bit tone deaf to post about just having a great weekend and a great time at Wool & Folk without acknowledging the very real concerns that many attendees and vendors had faced. Additionally, because Felicia wasn't responding, people started looking for other places to put blame. One of the people that this blame fell onto was Adela from Lola Bean Yarn Co. Adela was one of the sponsors that I mentioned earlier, and because of her friendship with Felicia, people were calling on her to ask Felicia to make a statement and make things right. You can read their whole statement on their Instagram if you would like. I'm just going to read a part of it. But this is what they said. As sponsors of the event, we were disappointed with how things turned out. One of the major grievances that we heard about and witnessed firsthand was the lack of ADA accommodations at the event, to include a lack of adequate parking close to the venue. While we were unable to control the weather, the rain definitely had a negative impact as well, which leads us to wanting to address something that was mentioned about preferential treatment. Please understand that Lola Bean Yarn Co. did not have any involvement in the planning of this event. Additionally, as a sponsor, we were disappointed that our company's logo was not advertised as agreed upon, both on the event's website as well as in and around the venue. We share in the frustrations that have been expressed by both vendors and patrons. While we enjoyed meeting and greeting folks outside of the building, it is unfortunate that the conditions on the ground and the way things transpired have overshadowed what should have been a great time. We want to apologize to anyone that did not have a very good experience, both patrons and vendors. We encourage everyone to seek out vendors that were at the event and shop with them to show support. Later in a live, Adela says that before they made this statement publicly, they did reach out to Felicia with the concerns. Felicia called them back and said, "I understand, do what you gotta do, I'm working on my statement." Adela also expressed frustration that so many people were calling for her to comment on it. She emphasized that they were just as in the dark as all of the vendors and attendees, and in some ways were more so because they weren't even receiving email updates that were sent to vendors or sent to the attendees. They were also there and experienced the dangerous conditions of the event, and said as able-bodied adults that even they were slipping and sliding around.
We apologize for something we didn't do.
Many were upset that they didn't post a response sooner due to their personal friendship with Felicia, but Adela says that they waited to post because of this connection. They didn't want to just respond emotionally and make a statement that was just about them. It was complicated to parse out the business and the personal relationship.
Stop acting like Lola Bean Yarn Co. is in charge of anything, got special treatment. I got treated,
if anything,
worse, because that was supposed to be my friend.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
That was supposed to be my friend. I ain't got shit else to say.
So Lola Bean Yarn Co. waited 3 days after the event to post, and 4 days after, Felicia finally posted. She didn't have much to say. She posted this with the comments turned off, and I'll read a few parts of it to you. You can pause and read the rest if you're interested. To the Woolen Folk community. I want to apologize to the knitting community. The transition to a new venue this year was more challenging than I could have ever anticipated. Logistics, coupled with the severity of the rainstorm, made accessibility and crowd control difficult for us. I am sincerely sorry that our accessibility goals were not met, and am equally disappointed in the way the day transpired. I had hoped and envisioned a great experience for everyone. I will be taking a hard look at the ways that I can improve Woolen Folk and promise to bring you the wonderful and inclusive Woolen Folk event that you have grown to love. To the vendors, I offer an apology to you. Woolen Folk will continue to promote you and your business by sending emails to our guests and links to your site in order to support your businesses. I learned some hard lessons this weekend. I hear you and will do better. With the utmost sincerity, Felicia and the Woolen Folk team. Probably not shocking to find out that this felt like too little, too late from most of the people that attended and vended, and people basically did not accept this apology. According to most vendor accounts, there was no sort of private communication or private apology to them following the event. Many vendors felt that it was appropriate to request refunds after how poorly the event had gone, and they said that they had been blocked, and Felicia has not posted publicly since. I think by this point we can agree that the day of the festival didn't go badly on accident. At many points, there were people who were underqualified, misinformed, or maybe purposely negligent in order to save money or time or whatever. The natural blame for all of this falls on the event organizers, which I think is completely justified, but I do think the Foreland, the event venue, is a party that holds responsibility for part of what has happened here. In a statement to the Times Union, the venue expressed frustration about the way that the event was handled, which is kind of the bare minimum reaction to seeing this happen at your event space. But in addition to this frustration, they also note that they have made administrative changes to ensure no renter performs duties with negligence that would create discomfort for any attendees of contracted events in the future. In the same statement, they also say that they were crystal clear with them as to what their safety and usage responsibilities were, and clearly those terms were not followed. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, the money. What did the event cost? Where did it go? All of that fun stuff. So there were 90 vendors at this event, and just to make it easy, let's say each one of them paid $900. Some of them paid more for a double booth. Some of them paid less for half booths. There were the discounts and all of that stuff. Let's just say 90 vendors at $900. That is $81,000. Most reports are saying that they sold 3,000 tickets. Again, on the lower side, let's just say everybody paid $45 for a ticket. That is $135,000. And then the event also had sponsors. On the same page of the website that had the vendor booth prices was the named tiers of sponsors listed with the amounts. So based on that list, they took in about $25,000 as like a low estimate from sponsors. And adding all of that up, we're looking at around $241,000 on sort of the lower end, if I'm making all of my lower assumptions here. But to have a nice round number, let's just say $250,000. Events can obviously be expensive with venue pricing and the rentals, all of that stuff. Based on documents from the Foreland website, renting the venue on the Thursday and the Friday was $29,000. And then with all of the like table and chair rentals and all of that stuff and like the booths and stuff, let's just round up. Let's double it a little. Let's almost double it and say $50,000. I'm not really sure how to figure out food truck costs, but I think based on just a little bit of Googling around, and maybe I'm completely off, for the 3 food trucks, I think we'll say $30,000. Seems like a lot. Seems like probably too much, but that is about $10 per person. So we're adding the venue costs, we're adding the food truck costs, and probably there was some live music stuff, but I don't know. I don't really have much information about that, so we'll just sit that at $80,000 that they paid for this event, which leaves $170,000 that's not really easily accounted for. Again, I'm not accusing anyone of anything here. Let me make that crystal clear. I'm sure there are more costs that I didn't factor in, but I will say in event planning, venue, rentals, and food do tend to be the biggest chunks of the pie, and that's not even half of the projected revenue that the event brought in. So part of the reason why I do bring this up is because String Thing Studio, Felicia's yarn store, has been having money problems for a while. In 2020, she started a GoFundMe called Keep String Thing Studio Open. And according to the description of the GoFundMe, the money was going to be used to pay rent and to prepare to make the changes to be compliant so the store can reopen. I'm not sure what the non-compliance issue was in 2020, and I don't want to read into it too much, but it is a relevant point to note that Felicia's yarn store was struggling. The GoFundMe raised $28,000, which evidently was enough to keep the yarn store open for a couple years. And after checking some legal documentation, Felicia defaulted on rent payments for the first 2 months of 2022 and ended up having to pay that interest on the rent, resulting in her having to pay $12,000 on the missing rent. The latest announcement when you go to the String Thing Studio website is an announcement that the store is closed for the summer, but it's fall now and it doesn't look like it's open. And according to this post on Reddit, the space is actually for rent. So I am here in Brooklyn to verify that this sign is on the String Thing Studio. It is for rent. And it looks like a lot of the stuff in the shop is like empty. There's still shelves and stuff there. There's still yarn stuff, but it's like empty now.
I don't think you can really see in there with the reflection of stuff, but there's just like boxes and shelves that look like they've been cleared out, but it's not completely empty. There's some like snacks. There's a dead plant in the window.
Okay, breaking news. I have found out from a fairly reliable source that String Thing Studio is not in fact going under, like they're not closing down the store. They're actually just moving locations, and that's why the space is for lease. That's why all of the boxes are packed up. My source did not give me very many details, but they did allude to it possibly being about money. They're moving to a location in a similar neighborhood, but it seems like it doesn't have quite as many advantages as the current location. It's on a second floor and it doesn't have an outside space and some of those things. Apparently, they will be opening this new location by December is what I've heard, but we'll see. We'll see. That's all the information I have about that. So yeah, it's safe to say Felicia was not doing well financially, and I'm not saying that she purposely or maliciously ran the festival into the ground so that she could pay back her debts. I'm not saying that. But it is safe to say that she did struggle with balancing her books and staying on top of compliance and legal regulations, so it's kind of not a shock to see how planning this festival just got away from her. So yeah, how do we conclude this video? I don't know. I think the main thing is that the whole situation is just full of negligence and oversights from multiple parties. I do think, though, as the organizer, Felicia does shoulder most of the blame. And event planning is really hard. Like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like, oh, it's just so easy. She should have just done all of these things. It would have been so easy. There are a lot of hoops to jump through, and not everybody is cut out for it. A lot of people online are saying that vendors have grounds for a class action lawsuit for breach of contract because they were never given an updated contract, as far as we know, for the venue change, and many vendors did not get what they paid for in terms of booth space because of the rain destroying their spaces and things like that. It's not clear whether this will happen or what would happen if they did try and file something like this, but my guess would be they're not going to see any sort of refund money unless they do take it to court. I think that it's always interesting when events fall apart like this, and it's always a good reminder to, thank the people who make events run well when they do run well, because they are hard and it takes a lot to balance. And I don't know if there's really a moral to this story, except don't try and plan an event by yourself. Don't try and plan an event if you don't know how. I don't know. And I just want to end the video with some acknowledgements. Thank you to everyone who sent me this story, any posts, comments as they were appearing on your feeds. I would not have been able to put this together without your help. I was sort of busy while this was going down, so that's why it's taken me a little bit of time to put this video out, but I appreciate everybody sending resources to me as they went live so I could keep up with it. And a massive thank you, first of all, to an anonymous researcher who sent me a bunch of information over email and opened up a bunch of rabbit holes for me to go down. They wanted to remain unnamed, but asked that I call them the diligent Philadelphia researcher. So thank you so much for sending all of that information in. I'm always so honored when people want to help me in any way putting these videos together. And it's really cool to get to make this a little bit of a collaborative process, especially with this one, with people sending me in stories of their experience of what was going on and having people help me with the research and sending me links to meeting minutes and things like that. So thank you. Thank you to Tristan of Dragon Horde Yarn, Sophie, TC Stanford, and of course the people who wanted to remain anonymous for sharing your stories and experiences of the event. The day after I filmed this, another creator, Austin Green, put out a video on the situation. It goes over a lot of the same things that I talked about in this video, but there are a few little notes that he included that I didn't. This story is just like so deep and there's so many posts about it that there was really no way to talk about everything. So if you want to hear more after you watch this video, then check out Austin's video as well. That's kind of all I have for this video. If you liked the video, like it with your mouse, click the like button. Apparently that's good. I don't know. Also subscribe to my channel. A lot of people who watch are not subscribed. And I know, I can always tell. I don't know. I mean, if you're not subscribed, you should subscribe. If you want to support me on Patreon, all of the information will be listed below. I have monthly Patreon exclusive podcasts where I just go through and talk about things that I don't feel like constitute a whole video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.